Hello and welcome to the History Department here at Harris Academy, Beckenham. Here we're very proud of our curriculum and we're the teachers that make up the team. I am Mrs Hamlin, this is Miss Alexander, Mr Turton and Miss Hussain. In order to become one of our HABE historians, we'd like you to have a 5 in English and a 6 at GCSE History. Like I said, we're very proud of our curriculum, so we're going to take you through and show you what it is that you would be learning if you were here with us. And we're going to start with paper 1, which is taught by Miss Alexander.
Good afternoon, my name is Miss Alexander and I teach the module In Search of the American Dream, 1917 to 1980. Within our studies, we cover political changes caused by events such as the Watergate scandal, the Korean and the Vietnam War. We then also have a look at the quest for civil rights for communities such as African Americans, the Hispanics, and also Native Americans, before we finally have a look at changing living standards caused by the 2 world wars, as well as the introduction of the car, radio, and television.
Paper 2 is also taught in Year 12, and that is taught by me. In paper 2, we look at the journey of the Black South African people from oppression to what is known as their Rainbow Nation. We start in 1948 when the National Party imposed apartheid, which meant separation for black and white people and other categories of people, as talked about by the National Party.
Good afternoon, my name is Mr Turton and I teach the paper 3 element in Year 13, the Tudors Rebellion and Disorder 1485 to 1603. As part of this course, we focus on the gaining the cooperation of the localities, so how the Tudor monarchs were able to gain control and authority over Wales and the north of England, as well as the institutions of central government and how they developed and refined over this time. We'll also cover the key rebellions that the Tudor monarchs faced as they established their long-lasting dynasty.
Hello, my name is Miss Hussain and we finish up the History A-level with me. I teach the History coursework here and we focus on the origins of the Cold War from 1941 to 1949.
Hi there and thank you for joining the History at Harris at Beckenham masterclass this afternoon. Have a look at my title for me. It says, how can we use the provenance of primary sources to illuminate the struggle of the past? I want to use this session this afternoon to really engage with you and demonstrate to you how important, how integral source work is going to be at Key Stage 5. At Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, you will have looked at historical sources before and you would have answered questions on them. But my oh my, can sources absolutely stimulate the kind of discussion that just makes your courses so powerful at Key Stage 5. So I'm going to demonstrate this with you mainly by just deconstructing one particular source, which I think embodies the kind of struggle that we look at in paper 2. So with that, just to remind you, as you'll have just seen, paper 2 is led by me, Mrs Hamlin, and we look at the topic entitled Apartheid to a Rainbow Nation. So we look at the Apartheid Regime and its introduction in 1948 under the National Party, and we follow its journey all the way up to 1994 with the free election of their first Black president, Nelson Mandela, in South Africa. So, South African history is something that surprisingly I always find when I get my new Key Stage 5 class, that actually few students have had the opportunity to really study, and it is extremely interesting, incredible, awful. I mean, the themes in it are remarkable, and I'll go through some of these with you in a second before we have a look at this source. So just to deconstruct this title, how can we use the provenance of primary sources? Here I'm looking at less so, the content and what is said or written in these sources, but more so where they've come from, who wrote them, where they're kept, why they're kept there, why they were written, who they were written for. These are the kind of integral conversations that we will be having about sources before really deconstructing what's written in them. And we're going to use these discussions to illuminate the struggle of the past, to illuminate, to shine light on, to reveal to us the truth about these people's struggle. And by struggle, we are looking at those who are felt oppressed by the apartheid regime. So a bit of context then for us. This A-level topic will look at the emotional, incredible story of how South Africa went from bringing in the law of apartheid to being forced to get rid of it entirely in the 1990s. This is the political, economic, social, sporting awful, incredible story of a people's fight for freedom in South Africa. Yes, you'll come across figures you recognise, most notably this man here on the right-hand side, Nelson Mandela. But will you also come across incredible figures that you won't have seen before? You'll see unlawful imprisonment, you'll see peaceful resistance, liberties taken, massacres happen, and international condemnation takes such a long time to come. But when it does, Britain and our London is at the heart of its campaign. The journey of South Africa in the 20th century is one to be tackled. It is one to make sure you know, and it is why we make sure at Year 12 we put huge emphasis on you really having a confident knowledge of it. As I say, you get a great understanding from the documents that are revealed to us from those moments, and that is what I'm going to emphasise in this masterclass now. So just to be clear, apartheid literally means apartness. It was the idea of separateness based on defining racial and ethnic categories more rigorously than had ever been done before in South Africa. And unfortunately, rights were also allocated on the basis of which category you fell in. If you have a look at the dates that I put in bold here, 1948 to 1994, that's post-war, that's 20th century. A lot of what our first major discussions are in Year 12 are just, how could this happen? Well, I tell you, it doesn't happen by accident. The National Party are very particular about the principles that they appeal to. They are rooted in decades of colonisation and slavery, and these principles encourage some minority groups in South Africa to vote the National Party into power. And this man here on the right-hand side, called Hendrik Verwoerd, he's the Minister of Affairs. Some people call him the architect of apartheid, the man who created it and then had the imagination behind it. Verwoerd promoted apartheid as something called good neighbourliness. He said, yes, we're separate, but we will be good neighbours. Well, I'm sure you will all completely understand that it was not taken as good neighbourliness by all. And this masterclass, we're going to completely pull apart one of the sources that embodies the struggle of those who were oppressed by apartheid. Here are some of the policies. I won't go through them all, but here are some of the policies that were brought out to support kind of grand apartheid and this idea of separateness. And you'll just see, how much of a struggle this would have been. So have a look on the left here in this yellow box, the Mixed Marriages Act of 1949 prevented people from having interracial relations. We've got the Group Areas Act on the right-hand side here in the red box in 1950. Large black communities who live near towns were pulled away from towns and made to live in urban areas, literally stripped of their homes. The reservation of the Separate Amenities Act in the orange box made it legal to provide separate facilities for black people, which were not of an equal equality by any means. Apartheid was a separateness, but it was also an oppression. And I want us to have a look at a source that embodies the beginnings of a struggle that went on for 60 years. So this is the sort of task that we might do at the beginning of a lesson. Something to really engage our discussion, to make sure that we have a depth of understanding of what's happened so far and pull apart what we can see before us. Look at this image on the right-hand side. This is the source itself. It's a bit of writing on a wall. Named the Freedom Charter. Now, a bit of context here. The Freedom Charter was written up in 1955 by a collection of different opposition groups who were very much against apartheid. It has a series of hopes and dreams for South Africa, and it was South Africa as a whole. The crux of this is that written here is just that they hoped to build unity, they hoped to build fairness, they hoped to build equality. Freedom Charter was written document representative of a collection of different opposition groups. Now, none of those opposition groups were in power, so this was never made law, but it was a point. It was a stand. It was a moment of absolute opposition towards a government that were trying to oppress them. It kind of embodied everything that they wanted, and it embodied their unity against this regime. This was brought out in 1955, and after this you see lots of leaders of these opposition groups put on trial for 5 years, done for high treason just for writing this document. And have a look at its provenance. Remember I said provenance is where it came from, who wrote it, where it's kept. This is not the Freedom Charter itself. This is an image from 14 grey steps below the dock in a Spartan concrete corridor leading to the holding cells where Mandela and his fellow accused were held before trial. Guys, this was written below the dock, below where they were being trialed for going against the government. Somebody has written this on the wall. Chief among these cells and this corridor and some of these photographs is a 5 metre by 7 metre room where the walls are just coated in graffiti by generations of political prisoners. And here in lies the Freedom Charter. So this discussion would be had in our lesson, you know, why is this written here? Well, it's written here because somebody dared enough whilst on trial to come down from those steps and write and rewrite what was written on that day in 1955 by that collection of opposition groups. How desperate were they? That they had no worries about what would be done if this was found. This is written in the place where they were being tried to be put in prison for Mandela's case 27 years, and yet this is where they put it. What does that tell us about what the Freedom Charter meant? That somebody knows it off by heart enough to scribe it on a wall beneath the steps of the dock where they were being tried. What does it tell us? That it's the Freedom Charter that was written and not something else that was written. How important is that Freedom Charter to these people? It shows us that these hopes and these dreams are still very much alive with these people as they are put on trial all these years afterwards. The fact that this is not the only thing that gets written on this wall, but actually the walls are coated in graffiti by generations of political prisoners. Our conversation would denote the fact that the Freedom Charter was integral to the movement of these people who opposed apartheid. When learning about the Freedom Charter, we might go through exactly what was written, and we might talk about the day in which they wrote it and who was part of it. But oh wow, do you get more of an understanding of how integral this Freedom Charter was to these people by seeing it inscribed on a wall of a Spartan corridor that takes them down to the cells where they were being kept before their trial. How much more do you gauge about the Freedom Charter just by seeing this inscription on this wall? These are the kind of discussions we'll have to stimulate and ensure that we have a complete knowledge of what happens here in South Africa. I'll show you another. Here on the left-hand side is the judgment in the Supreme Court of South Africa, the state versus Nelson Mandela and others. These are the minutes taken at the trial of Nelson Mandela previous to him having 27 years in prison. We need to work with the primary sources from these moments and not just, and of course they're integral, but not just what the historiography tells us and what these historians believe about the evidence that they're seeing in front of them. You'll see that the collection of sources is all entitled The Struggles for Freedom in Southern Africa. There are huge amounts of resources here available for us that you would be asked to grapple with at degree level, so why not start grappling with it now? Have a look, dive through these collections, and these are the sorts of things that we'll be expecting you to do and do collaboratively in our lessons at Key Stage 5. Really, really deconstruct these sources and the provenance of these sources and what that can tell us. So to end, to ensure we know how this story will end in 1994, Mandela becomes the figurehead of the call to take down apartheid around the world. partly because of his involvement in things like the Freedom Charter and his involvement of what is inscribed at the bottom of those cells below the docks of the trial. It's also partly to do with the speech, the document that I've just showed you there on the left-hand side on the slide before this. He says he's happy to die for this cause. The government are terrified of making him a martyr, so can't let him die for this cause. The pressure internationally is also a key element in the fall of apartheid. However, South Africa is in chaos as the townships are revolting against the government. The state of emergency is losing its control. It does not come to an end swiftly and easily and smoothly. But de Klerk, the last National Party Prime Minister, decides that Mandela's freedom would calm the chaos and the peaceful negotiations could be made. And so Mandela is freed in 1990, and we see him become president in 1994. And through those 4 years, negotiations are really, Nobel Prizes are won as a result of how difficult these negotiations are, but how peaceful they managed to keep them. Again, when we get to the end of this topic and we're at Key Stage 5, we will be pulling apart those documents that are written during those negotiations and thinking about the provenance of them and who said what and why they said it. There is so much that you can take from sources, and there is so much more that you can gauge about the real truth behind the matters. Yes, our content is prevalent to us throughout our topics, but I look forward to seeing you at Key Stage 5 where we can deconstruct some of these primary sources and the real importance of the provenance of these sources. Thank you for your time this afternoon. I look forward to seeing you next year.